Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is an entrepreneur and, of course, an author too, no other than Mrs. Steph Rowe.
Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me on Book 101.
Yes, of course, Mrs. Steph, and can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, listeners. My name is Stephanie Rowe, and I am a author of my self-published memoir, Fiercely Me. I am from Australia, Brisbane, but I'm currently traveling the world at the moment, and I'm about to release my book in early December.
Congratulations,
Woo!
Mrs. Steph. So, what age did you realize that you're good in writing?
So it's an interesting question, Daniel. I have written my entire life since I was very young, and I had a goal when I was a young girl. I was like, I want to write a book, and life gets in the way, and you go, you know what, I need to go and work, and I need to do this, and I need to do that, and for a large portion of my life, I was in survival, but I always went back to writing, and so to be honest, one of the hardest things for writing my memoir was to condense it down because like I when I started researching into my archives, I realized, wow, I have literally been writing a lot throughout my entire life, so I just always had a passion for it, and it was a really beautiful way of expressing myself. And when I was younger, there was a lot of trauma, and I would escape into books. And so that was kind of where my first love started. So I've always had a deep connection with words, poetry, and obviously books.
Interesting, Mrs. Steph. So, who are your favorite authors that influence you the most?
So it's interesting because it's changed, honestly, Daniel. Like we all do, over life, we change what we read.
Yes.
So if you'd asked 15-year-old Steph, it's a very different to the 36-year-old Steph now. So I think some of my moment is more about self-development and understanding the brain. And so I've kind of done a very, very deep dive into how the brain works, how the body works. So they're some of my favorite books. But I think Glenn Doyle, honestly, has been one of my favorites over the last few years. And she's just has this really powerful way of writing short stories, but in bursts. So you kind of go, if you're really busy, you can kind of just like open a book and just like read that section or that chapter and just be like, oh my God, the power that she writes with is just phenomenal. So I have to admit, I was a little bit influenced by her style of writing in mine because I just found that such a unique but beautiful way to connect to readers.
So, Mrs. Steph, did you get those criteria in your writing?
Yeah, I did. So it's it's another great question, Daniel. So I wrote this book, and I wrote it in a way where it was essentially we were sitting around a campfire, and I was talking to you about my life and the stories of my life, because for me, I have a really deep rooted connection to sharing knowledge and experiences through storytelling. And one of the things in Australia that I just admire so much in the Aboriginals is their storytelling. So they never had anything to write on, so that their form of historical documentation was through spoken word. So they would hand down stories. And I just really connected with that in my entire body. And so I really wanted to kind of write in that style. So my entire book is consistent of like 30 chapters, but in each chapter there is sub chapters, and they're just kind of different stories that have happened to me through my life, which are really engaging. because I haven't had like a normal, quote unquote, normal life. So, it's really interesting in how I take you on that journey through my storytelling. And so, yeah, it starts out with my parents had a bunch of money, bought a bus, and we went around Australia, and it took 3 years for us to go around Australia in this bus. And so some of my first memories is of being in the desert in a watering hole, which just like came out of nowhere, and me walking through like these trees to have like this massive group of people in this watering hole, and me just jumping in. And so my first memories are very different to a lot of other first memories of people of my age in Australia, where I got to experience that freedom and that exploration and adventure from a very early age. And so that's where I kind of start my stories, because it's like, it's interesting. Well, I think so anyway.
Indeed, really interesting, Mrs. Staff. So, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
Yeah, that's so I am obviously going to release this book, Fiercely Me, in the start of December. And then afterwards, I'm going on a bit of a roller coaster of publicity and PR. And one of my other passions is poetry and spoken word. And I have also, written poetry throughout my life as well. And I have recently decided that through my experience of self-publishing, how increasingly difficult it is to get exposure and to have opportunities. And so I thought to myself, well, I don't have enough poetry for my own book, but I would love to collaborate with other poets. And so I've done a call out, and I've got about 20 poets that have agreed to come on board and do a collaboration book. And so I'm going to be releasing that next year, mid next year, and it's going to be wonderful. I've been reading some of the submissions of the poets, and they are just amazing. And I was like, there's moments in life where you truly realize how special writing is and what a gift it is. And to be incorporated with such incredible poets is yeah, I'm so honored. So I have a feeling that this book is actually going to be quite a success. So that's my next endeavor after I release Fiercely Me.
Definitely, you are most welcome to come back. And I have another podcast called Abstract Poetry. I
Really?
do, yes. I myself is a poet, so
No way. Well,
yeah.
if you wanted to come in, Daniel, you are more than welcome.
Definitely, I'm inviting you to be my guest on my abstract poetry. Let's talk about poetry and recite our poetry book. So, me, Steph, before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in Peru, because you are in Peru, and after that in Australia. Because in Lima, I got 33% audience share.
Oh,
Ari,
hello, people in
yeah,
Lima.
and Arequipa at 33%, and Lima region at 33% audience share. Thank you, Peru, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created and empower writers all over the world, like Mrs. Steph Rowe. So, Mrs. Steph, let's talk about your upcoming memoir.
Yes.
How did you crafted it?
So I wrote the whole book within 7 months, and I've been working full time up until recently. So I would get up at like 4 in the morning, and I would sit down and I'd write in the mornings. And then once I finished work and did all my chores, I'd sit down again and I'd write, and then I'd go to bed and I'd be like, oh my God, I need to go change this part. So I'd jump out of bed and I'd go and like sit there and like start typing until 12 at night. And so my husband was just like, oh my God, this crazy woman. But it was just like, once I'd started, it just poured out of me. So the first draft took 7 months, and I was very dedicated, and I wrote every day, and I went over it, and it was a labor of love. And then as every first author does, they're like, oh, this is amazing. And then you get feedback and you're like, no, it's not. and I was like, I thought I was like this unicorn, but I wasn't. And I had to like suck that up. So I then spent another 6 months reworking it. And it was like I would get feedback from some of my closest friends because they'd obviously gone on the journey with me. But it took, honestly, another solid 6 months to kind of get this manuscript into a place where I was like, no, this is good. And so that was like, that's 11, nearly a year there just to kind of get this memoir to this point, which in the terms I have realized of self-publishing a book can take a lot longer than just 12 months. But I also had a lot of writing that I had done over my lifetime. So it wasn't, I wasn't starting from scratch. So yeah, I had to like be ruthless, take parts out. I had to like realize that I wasn't telling the whole story. And that was where really the name of my book, Fiercely Me, came from, was realizing that I was writing it in the first draft to appease everybody else. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to cause any curry with anybody. I didn't want anyone to be upset with me. And I really had to have this moment after I finished it of like internal conversation to go, you know what, Stephanie, you aren't actually being truthful about your experience. And although there are elements within this book, Fiercely Me, that is quite confrontational in the sense of some of my life experiences, I needed to be honest about how it affected me and how I then resolved it to then be in a place where I can now talk about it. And I was going to work one morning and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go home and I'm going to fiercely write my story from my perspective of how it made me feel. And I don't care about anyone else's judgment. I don't care about how I will be perceived because it's my story and it's my lived experience. And so after that point, I had to literally walk into my own writing. And that's where the rewrite happened. And it was so much more powerful because I was being honest. I was being honest about my upbringing, about the poverty that I'd experienced, but also my drive as a human being. Like I put on a multi-arts festival so that I could give a platform for other artists to shine. So I talk about that in the book. So even though I come from a place of severe poverty, I utilized everything within my being to then turn it around to do really positive things. And every time someone was like, you're not going to be able to do that, or you're not going to get that job, I'd go out and I'd learn the skills that I needed in unconventional ways so that I could progress further. So the story really all of these things, but in the end, I had to really own up to it and I had to own up to who I was. And so in the end, how I wrote this book, Daniel, is by like being honest with myself and going, you know what, this story is mine and should be out in the world, because I really hope that there will be one person out there that will connect, or hopefully more, like, let's be honest. More than one, but, that it resonates about, having to walk into your honest truth and your experience, and that, there is no shame in what's happened to you, but what you choose to do going forward is up to you, and how you choose to engage with the world around you is also up to you. And, this world can be difficult, but it can be also so beautiful. And so I'm really hoping that, that comes through in the book and the reader can really pick up on that.
Very well said, Mrs. Steph. So what challenges did you face while writing Fiercely Me?
Oh, Daniel, so many. So many. Oh my God. Where do I start? So having to be honest with myself and going, this isn't a great manuscript, Steph, you need to do some work. That was really challenging. Like having to face yourself in the mirror and be like, you're not the writer you thought you were, but you will be. And having that faith in yourself was tremendous. Like, it's such a vulnerable thing. And there's a moment where I'm still like, oh my God, my story is going to be out in the world soon. Like, anybody can read it, because it's such a vulnerable thing to open up to human beings that you've never met. And but that's what writers do, right? They express themselves in different ways through storytelling, and I think that's the beauty of it. So that's one thing that I really I struggled with. The second is the way that I wrote it. A lot of editors were just like, they'd get it and then they'd be like, why did you do this? Why did you write it like this? What are you doing? You know, and I was just like, oh my God, you know, like, there are different ways, guys. There are different ways to write, and there's different storytelling. And just because I'm not doing the, you know, typical, you know, chapter 1 to chapter 10 in your eyes, doesn't mean that there is that I'm doing anything wrong. And so I had to really overcome that, and I had to really fiercely back myself and know, you know what, this book is actually great. And the people that have read it now are just like, far out, man, like this is just phenomenal. So I'm like happy that I was able, I understand and respect you as industry professionals, and I understand that I'm pushing the conception for a lot of people in the profession of how a traditional memoir should be written. But I think that's the beauty of life, is that we are all different, Daniel, and we all get to express ourselves in different ways. And just because one editor thinks that I'm not doing it right doesn't mean that the next editor will. So that's the beauty of life itself. We're getting a little philosophical, but essentially that's it. You know, like, we're not all the same, and to have a go. And, you know, my book might actually resonate with a lot of other people who might pick up another memoir and be like, this doesn't actually resonate with me. Like, I don't connect with it. So, you know, that was another hurdle I had to really go over, because, you know, like, this is my first book, and I'm like, you know, wanting to trust everybody, but then I'm also like, I just feel like this is the right direction for me to go in. So that was the second one. I had the fourth hurdle was like editors. Like, I would pay money to an editor and then they wouldn't do what they said. And that happened 4 times, 4 times, Daniel. And so I just thought, oh my God, maybe I'm never going to release this book. And then I realized, nope, it's going to be released because my story is important for others to hear. And so I kept going. And on the 5th attempt, I found editor, and he was amazing. And he was able to edit the book. So that's just a couple of hiccups.
Is it hard to be honest to yourself?
Yes, it is extremely hard. I think there is a tendency that we shouldn't, and it's the conditioning of society, that we should just shy away from our truth and who we are and having those hard conversations, because it's hard and it's uncomfortable and there's lots of feelings that, you know, we might not necessarily enjoy. And so, you know, kind of deflecting that and just kind of, you know, ignoring it is easier. But I personally think that when you kind of be honest with yourself and you have those deep conversations and like go, yeah, because like I'm a lovely human being and I'm loving and I'm, you know, I care and I have empathy and compassion, but I also have other parts of me as well that I'm not proud of. But that's like every human being. And so to acknowledge those other parts inside of me can be very vulnerable and be like, you know what, I didn't deal with that very well. You know, I want to do that way better, that interaction next time. And oh my God, that makes me feel so bad. And, you know, like having to have those conversations and how I'm going to deal with like that situation, or how I'm going to deal with myself, like not beating myself up so much. Like I've had to unlearn that. Like as a woman, you know, I have like come from a teenager who needs to be a skinny, you know, woman that's blonde and blue eyes, and I'm not any of that. I'm voluptuous and loud and got dark hair. And I'm not your picture perfect Australian surfer babe, you know. And so like I had to be vulnerable with that as well and be like, you know what, just because I'm a bigger woman doesn't mean that I'm not beautiful, you know. And I had to have those hard conversations with myself. And I talk about this in the book. I talk about how I had to go through and go and look at myself in the mirror every morning, because I'd wake up and I would be so nasty to myself. Like the things I would say to me, I would never dream of saying to another human being. And so I had to change that cycle, which I had gotten into and was very comfortable being in, this self-loathing, destructive cycle of hatred towards myself. And I had to break it. And then I had to find one thing that I appreciated in the mirror of myself. And I had to tell myself that, Daniel. And I had to go, you've got beautiful eyes today. Just one nice thing I had to say. And what I realized was it would change my entire trajectory of my day. And so through doing that, I practiced it every day, regardless of how I felt. I'd get up and I would go to the mirror, clean my teeth, and I would look at myself and be like, thank you for my legs, for holding me up today and for walking me around. Like I'm really thankful that I have legs that are working, that are operating, that are holding me, so I had to go through that process of like essentially self-hatred and vulnerability and go, you know what? I'm not as horrible as I think I am. And so, so there's been such huge developments that I've made. And now I'm happy with my body. And there's lots of people in my life that are like, still to this day, think I should lose weight. And I'm like, and when I decide to lose weight, and if I do decide, Daniel, it will be on my terms because I want my body to be stronger. But I think that I'm beautiful. And so I think like sharing these stories within my book, I'm hoping to at least touch like a portion of people where they might connect to that and have those kind of vulnerable moments and go, you know what, I can change it.
Definitely. Definitely true, Mrs. Steph. But before we go on,
I feel
before
like you
we,
can connect a little bit to that, Daniel.
yes, I can connect. I always do that to myself too. In front of the mirror, you are so great today. I'm telling to myself. To make brighter my day. But before we go on, Mrs. Steph, I want to shout out to the people listening in Down Under because you're from Australia.
Yeah.
Because in Western Australia, I get 28% audience share. Victoria 24, New South Wales at 20%, Queensland at 16, Australia Capital Territory at 7%, South Australia 4%, and Tasmania at 1%. Thank you, Australia, for
Thank
supporting this
you.
podcast. Woohoo! I hope more people listening to this podcast in Down Under. So, Miss Steph, what is your daily writing routine like?
My daily writing routine at the moment is a little bit more fractured. I'm writing more poetry at the moment. Obviously I've just gone through the last like 6 weeks of editing, of going through all the edits of my book. So so that's just been, like as soon as I get a new edit, like spending like days going over it, making sure that if I need to add parts, I do. But at the moment, I'm more writing poetry, and I'm writing it about the world that I see around me, which I love. And it's just so beautiful to have that ability to express and to do it in such a way where I can take other people on that journey as well that might not have the opportunity to travel like me and my husband are. So so it's just kind of like me writing on my phone when I'm like, because I just get so overwhelmingly inspired by the world around me that I just start typing on my phone. But that's kind of my routine at the moment until I pick up. I'm not sure if I'll write another book, and if I do, I have no idea if I will. But I do know that I want to release a book with all of the photos from my travels and like just kind of stories of where we've gone. But outside of that, I'm not sure if I will release another book. But hey, I'm not going to say never because I surprise myself. But yeah, that's kind of my writing, daily writing at the moment.
Definitely interesting, Mrs. Steph. So, do you have any advice for aspiring writers out there?
Oh, yes, I do. You are going to come up against criticism, judgment, and people that are going to say that you're never going to sell a book and they're just going to be pessimistic. And every author, I personally think, has to come to terms with that and kind of deflect it and just have that faith in yourself and have that faith that you deserve to write and you deserve to tell your story, no matter if it's fiction or non-fiction or if it's poetry or whatever it is. Like, you deserve to express yourself in this world. And my guidance is just to keep going. And you're going to have people say things the whole way through. Just, it's like water off a duck's back. Just let it go and just focus on what drives you and what fulfills you and your creativity and expressing that. So just keep going and try, because you never know. Like, I live by 50-50s. So if 50% yes, 50% no. So you never know what can happen in this world.
Yes, people, don't give up. If you have the passion of writing, go for it. Probably you are the best in the making, like Mrs. Rowe.
Thank you so much.
So,
And I
Mrs.
just wanted to quickly say, my book
Yes.
is actually up for pre-sale at the moment. So if I'm selling it via ebook and hardcover, and it's on my website, which is www.mrsrowe.org.
Yes, let's support
Yeah.
Mrs. Rowe. So, what is the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
Honestly, it is, for me personally, it is rereading my work. So I reread the love section in my book, which is I think it's the second last chapter, and I started crying because I made myself so, like, I just filled myself up with so much love and so much appreciation. And I remember like reading it to my husband, just, we were both crying, and I was like, I can't believe I wrote such amazing words. Like, this is incredible. Like, I think that is the most fulfilling part, is to just stand back and to be like, I created this, I wrote this came from my soul, my heart. Like, and to reread it and to be moved is just such a wonderful thing. Like, I was like, if I'm being moved, like, and I'm the person that wrote it, like, other people are going to be moved, like, and I think that's, for me, that's the whole point, is like, just to be able to express and to feel that, and to, yeah, I love that about writing. So that's my favorite part, rereading.
So, Mrs. Steph, if you want to go back and revise the book itself, which part of your memoir you want to revise?
Well, I have actually done that. I have done that, Daniel. um, I've done that a few times now. I think, and I'll go to one of the ones that I did revise. I went back and I revised the start of the book, because the way that I had written it, when I'd reread it, I was like, this is kind of boring. This isn't stimulating me. So like, and that's kind of how I kind of interpret my book. It's like, if I'm not enjoying it, if this isn't fun for me, then like the reader's not going to enjoy it. And like, so I just kind of like culled it. I was just like, you know what? I don't have to put this in there. And that was the other thing I learned. I was just like, this is my book. I get to choose what goes into it. If I decide later on I don't want it to, like, those chapters to be in there, I get to remove it. Like, I have that autonomy to choose how this book is actually written. So that was like one of my big revisions, was just to go, you know what, if this isn't great writing, I don't have to put it in there. And I just culled it. So yeah, that's what I learned in the revision sector, is that, like, and I think having some time as well, like, I think I did 3 months, and then I didn't do anything on the book. And then I went back and I reread it. And I was like, and I think that's great, because you've kind of disconnected from the book a little bit after a few months. So you can be a lot more objective about it. And it gave me a very different viewpoint of the book. So I was able to just go, I need to revise this. I need to write more in this area. And I need to cull this. So that was what I learned.
So, Mrs. Steph, firstly, which chapter did you enjoy the most writing?
I enjoyed the most. That's such a hard one. I think I enjoyed the most the last chapter. Because by the time I got to the conclusion, to the end of the book, I was like striding into myself. Like I was just like, I trust myself in my writing capabilities. I know who I am. I know what I want to express. And so by the time I got to the conclusion, I wrote it. And I remember rereading it about 3 months later. And I was like, I read it and I was like, this is so good. Like, because I talk about in the conclusion the world that I want to see. And so the world that I want to see is very different to the world that we have at the moment. Great conclusion to go, you know what? Like, I've told you all these different stories, all these ways of coping and how I've learned and my journeys and my, adventures that I've gone on. But really, this is what resonates with me is that, I really hope that the world turns into this place, and I hope that I participate in that. And I hope that equality is brought forward for everybody, because, I think traveling for me has really shown that, I am extremely privileged, but I want everyone to experience my life. And I think that, that is so important to me, that everyone has an opportunity to have safety and a house and, clean water and food and, utilities and like healthcare, like all of these basic things. So I think for me, that last chapter really resonated with me, because I could just be honest about what I wanted in this world and how I really love humanity and how I feel like we can actually change the world. And so, so by the time I got there, I was really happy with what I wrote in my conclusion.
Very well said, Mrs. Staff. So, if you have a chapter you enjoy the most, which chapter did you have difficulty of writing with?
I think it would be the trauma chapter, because so I had blocked memories that reconnected with my brain. And I talk about this in the book. And so essentially what happens is when, as a child, if you go and experience traumatic things, the brain is an amazing, it's incredible. And what it does is it essentially disconnects your experience from the rest of the brain. And once the brain thinks that you are able to process what has happened to you, what happens is that it connects back to the brain, and then and that's what I call, that is essentially what I'm referring to when I say a blocked memory. And so it's the only way I can kind of describe it is, it's almost like you're kind of doing your daily life, and then all of a sudden you just have this memory, and it just comes through, and you're just like, what is this? And you're very disorientated. And so that's what I talk about in the book. And that was the hardest part for me to kind of go through, because I not only experienced the block memories and the reconnection to my frontal cortex, but I had to then make sure that all of the memory that I had experienced as a child had come through. Because if you don't actually process the entire memory, then it can cause damage to the brain, and it's not very good. And so it was a huge thing for me to undertake, and a very vulnerable thing. And when my family found out that I was talking about this in my book, a lot of them were extremely angry and didn't want me to publish this. And so I talk about that as well in the book, because even though I'm a victim of traumatic things that have happened to me when I was a child, the fact that I own up to them and I'm honest about them, and I'm explaining what this means and how I dealt with it and what happened to me, people in some of the closest people in my life didn't actually want this to be out in the world. They wanted me to be quiet. They wanted me to adhere to the conditioning of society that, it never happened. And so I had to go through that as well. So it was a very hard chapter for me to go through, and especially when you have to go and you have to re-edit it, and then you have to, you have to go back and you have to rework it, and you have to be objective about it. And it was one of the hardest things to do, because not only did I live it, did the memory come through again as a 33-year-old woman, But then I had to kind of write. Then I decided I wanted to write about it and draw attention to it. So hopefully it wouldn't happen again in the future, and people had an education on how to deal with people when block memories come through and things like that. Because like there's so much miscommunication about this. So yeah, so I really wanted to use this one as this is my truth. This is what happened to me. But two, to kind of give an education to people to go, this is what a block memory is. And this is what happens to people. Like I dissociated, Daniel, for like 8 hours. Like, and what I mean by dissociated is like the only way I can describe it is that I would be living my life and then all of a sudden I would be back in my body and I'm like, where am I? What am I doing? Like it was the most scariest and confronting thing that I've ever experienced. And essentially, I would be missing like 8 hours of my life or 6 hours of my life. And I'd remember looking at my phone and it would be like 5 o'clock in the morning. And then looking at my phone again, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm supposed to be at work, and I'm in my kitchen in my pajamas. And I'm like, what am I doing? Why the hell am I still in the kitchen? And what the hell has happened to that time? And like, you try explain to your boss, like, oh, I'm sorry, but I just completely dissociated to the point where I have no idea what happened in those hours. It wasn't great, but like I talk about all this because like I can see the humor in it now, but when I was living it, it was not enjoyable. So I think that was one of the hardest parts for me to write and to be really vulnerable about, because if my family was also not very pleasant to me about this, I was also concerned about how the broader community would react to it.
Wow, very well said, Mrs. Steph. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the five-star restaurant in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about spice, people, spice. One of the ingredients that you need to create a delicious food. Plus one more. Our books are out, not only one but 12 volumes. Food 101 Volume 1 Basics is up to 12 is all the books that you need how to create a delicious food, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mrs. Steph, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming memoir, Fiercely Me?
Yes, I would love to. So I have it on pre-sale on my website www.mrsrowe.org, and that is spelled mrsrowe.org. I am also on all social media, so please come and follow me because I am a little bit entertaining. I'm on TikTok under Stephanie Rowe, Stephannie, Rowe, Rowe. I'm also on Facebook, Mrs. Rowe Author, and I'm also on Instagram, which is Mrs. Rowe Author. So come along, come and have a look at my journey, come and have a look at all of the places that I've been traveling to. And reach out if you have any questions. And I am very much grateful to you, Daniel, on Book 101 for having me on here. It has just been an absolute pleasure being interviewed by you.
Yes, and thank you, listeners, for my listen score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally, and of course, Feedspot for being number two best book podcast and number one in art category. And thank you so much. So, Mrs. Stuff, you are most welcome to come back and promote your second book or your poetry book.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yes, you too. Enjoy touring the world, and let me know your experiences. Okay, I have a
Definitely.
geography 101, so you can be my guest there, and let's talk about the places that you've been through, and let's promote your book.
Yay!
Yeah. I have a lot of podcasts that you want to explore and
Oh, 100%, which is fabulous, Daniel. And you should be very proud of yourself because this isn't an easy thing to accomplish, and you have, which is wonderful.
thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for according to my analytics, I got 148 countries listening to this podcast. Thank you so much because I created this podcast to empower writers all over the world. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much for yours.
Morrigan people, see you soon.